I'd like to call to order the May 11th Planning Commission meeting for the Isle of Palms and acknowledge that the press and public were duly notified in accordance with state law. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Have any comments or motions?
Motion to approve.
A motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any conversation, discussion? Let's take it to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Off the top, on the agenda, not on the agenda, but in the minutes from our last meeting, we were supposed to come up with a, what do they call them now, vice chairman?
That's right.
That's right.
For the committee. So
I nominate Sandy
But-
Stone.
I tell you what, since it's not on the agenda, let's
okay.
do that next month. And I will
Okay.
make a point of being sure that's on the agenda.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I
By
should have.
next month, you'll have a new member.
I missed the last.
Right.
That's right.
That we can stick it on him, them. That's,
Yeah,
I didn't mean that.
Yeah,
Genderly. Okay. So then the first item on the agenda of new business is to discuss and consider the short-term rental recommendations. And Douglas had submitted for us all the city attorney's draft of how the ordinance can look, as well as a letter from the mayor of Folly Beach that are going through a similar, I guess, study. And then a few emails from our neighbors on the island with difference of opinions of how we should move forward. So Douglas, why don't you kick us off?
yep. Thank you. So just to recap for the benefit of those maybe tuning in at this point, what is in your packet is really it's really the town of Kiowa's ordinance inserted over and kind of into our ordinance. So in the packet is what we call a red line. It has the black text that is our existing ordinance, and then the red underlined text is the new ordinance, or the potential new language that could be in an ordinance. That is a product that I've created, and it really is just the Kiowa language inserted into our code. It was my impression from our last meeting that was generally the consensus of the group, to kind of look at how Kiowa's model would overlap into our code if we wanted to do that. And I'll just go through the red line piece by piece, and I'll explain it as I see it, and then we can kind of open it up for discussion. So the first part of the changes would be changes to we would add some definitions. We would have rental zones, and those zones would be related to a map. You all have seen kind of a first draft at a map if we wanted to keep that map, and it's currently broken into 9 zones, and we'll get to how each zone is regulated in here later in the description. We have a new definition for the term cap, and that's kind of the term that we have all known to understand to mean the maximum number of rentals in a certain area. We then have the section that describes how the cap would be administered, and the way it would be administered is different zones would have different caps, and that's established in a table later in the code. If a cap were well, and first of all, properties currently holding or holding at the time a rental license, when they went to renew, those that were already in the system would automatically renew and be given a rental license for the next year. At the point at which a cap is met, the next property that applies in that district would go on to a waiting list. Then once you're on a waiting list, it would be a first come, first serve type system, where when a license went off of the list, the first person on the waiting list would then be allowed to get a license in that district. There is a section there that talks about the licenses not being transferable. You all have received some emails about that, but the way it's currently worded, and this again is taken directly from Kiowa's ordinance, is they would not be transferable if a new owner bought a property that had a rental license, and that property, that district was already at its cap. That new owner would go basically onto the waiting list and be in line for a future license. So the guy who's first in line would get that license. The guy who just bought the property would go to the end of the line. That point received some comments.
Do we want to discuss some of these as we go through, or just wait till?
Let's just go through it.
them.
Yeah, let's go through it and then we'll come back and kind of talk about any and all of it. The next section talks about properties that are really not truly rented, being not included in the cap and not being given a license. So this is to guard against property owners who would just think that they're preemptively getting protection. So they come to the office, they get a license, but they really don't rent it. They don't have any intentions of renting it. They just want to have this license as protection. This tool would say that you have to generate at least $3,000 worth of income, rental income. You also would have to be able to show some kind of proof that you are indeed renting it. So again, and we talked a little bit about concerns early on in this process that we would have this run on rental licenses of people trying to protect some right. It inflates our numbers to show some new number of licenses, but in reality, the number of short-term rentals hasn't changed. So this is geared at controlling that and keeping the numbers truly to just those that are actively being rented. The next section is the table, and this is the table of this is where the limit on the number of licenses in each district would be established by that table. The numbers that I have put on that table are the current numbers of the last complete year of numbers in each district plus 20%. So that is similar. It's slightly different than the way Kiowa did it, but it's similar in that it has created a slight cushion whereby each district would be allowed to have a little bit more in terms of rental properties. And that obviously that's not coming from the Planning Commission. That is somewhat pulled out of thin air on my part. But I will say that the thought there was that it would be a lot easier, and Kiowa had indicated that cushion they felt was important in getting the process through, getting the cap through the process, that it was a lot easier in their mind to establish a cap that's higher than the actual number. So everybody who currently is licensed would be allowed to continue to rent, than it would be to set it lower than the actual number, where you really do create a situation where you have to kind of choose winners and losers, for lack of a better term, of who's going to get these licenses. So that cushion is intentional. And like I said, it's currently set at 20% above the actual numbers in each district. That's the end of the changes. So I would say at this point, we kind of discuss what you will like, don't like. I would also just say, kind of in general terms, that the goal of this meeting is to figure out, in my mind at least, maybe you all have different goals, but we would need, the city council is waiting for a recommendation. There's been some sense of urgency from at least one, maybe multiple members of city council to have a recommendation back. So I think that I would like to get a sense of whether your changes to this format are minor, and we're talking about kind of tweaks that can be done in a relatively short time frame, whereby we'll send them on to council quickly. Or if we're kind of starting from scratch, we'll just talk about, the time frame. If we want to put it aside and try to come up with a new methodology to doing this, we would, we'd kind of go back to the drawing board to some extent. So that would be my goal, to kind of just get your feedback on whether I'm not expecting a recommendation tonight. And I think tonight this really is your first look at even a draft. So I would hope, though, we could figure out after tonight's discussion if we're close or if we're far off. So that would be my goal.
I think the methodology is good, so I'll kind of start in the middle with a random point, and we can go whichever direction if somebody else feels strongly. But that one section that was put in there to protect people from sitting on a rental without any real intention of renting it out, I don't know how you can regulate that. I mean, what's to stop people from pricing it at triple the cost of something reasonable and sitting on it that way, because they know that nobody's going to pay that for it. It accomplishes the same thing, but they could be advertising it full well. Just a thought.
So my thought on that was to change it to be that they have to show that it was unfit for occupancy for a majority of the previous year, meaning they would have an open building permit or something to say that why they couldn't rent it instead of advertise. Because I had the same thought you would. If they overpriced it just because they didn't want to rent it, but wanted to keep the license. So
What would you say to that, though? They said, yeah, it's a high price, but that's what I want to get for it.
if they're not renting it, then why why have the license?
Which
I'm playing
section are
devil's
you-
advocate a little bit.
I know, yeah.
I can see that.
No, I mean, I think what Douglas was saying, back, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Several years ago, quite a few years ago, we were talking about limiting licenses. No, we weren't. We were talking about reconfiguring how many people could occupy a home. And before it was adopted, there was a dash of people that got rental licenses because their existing home might conform to a greater occupancy than what the new ordinance required. I was one of those people. Never rented the house in my life, but considered it, as we've gotten comments from people, a property value thing, and wanted to protect the property value. So, there could potentially be, I don't know that I would do this again, because I obviously never rented my house over those 12 years that it might have been. But there are people who may, and quite frankly, if I were to do that, $3,000 is not necessarily a deterrent from doing that. Not when I've just been hearing some stories of what weekly rentals might be. That's a weekend, which we're trying to avoid.
It's a weeknight.
A weekend, yeah. Well, it depends on where you're, not in my house.
Now you're at.
But, so again, the things that, we have, done massive studies, quantities of licenses, and that really, hasn't really changed. But go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to backtrack a little bit on some of the data and the creation of the areas. Why not, since I was the one that made the map to start with and came up with the areas. I mean, I think my concern is that was created as a way of sorting data. It was a glorified cluster map. It really wasn't intended to define or regulate down the road. It was like, where are the licenses? And we kind of said, let's take these streets and put them into groups and see how many licenses are here. So I'm concerned about taking that to another level and say, okay, now that means more than that. Now we're going to regulate or create ordinances based on those zones. Because that was never really the intent when I put that together. So that's my first concern. It accomplished what it was supposed to. It showed some clear differences in areas, which I think was what we wanted to show. There are some areas that are more residential at 15% licenses, and some areas that have 50 or 60% licenses. And maybe we should be treating those differently. To me, there's other ways to treat them differently other than creating another overlay of zones. We have existing zoning on the island. We have other things, much like Kiawah did. Kiawah didn't create new zoning. They said, we're going to take our existing SR ones and twos and threes, except these streets, and we're going to apply it to SR 1, 2, and 3. They didn't create a new overlay. They didn't create new zones. They didn't do anything else. They just said all single-family residents will be restricted except these streets, which were then outside of that. So I'm a little concerned about creating this new overlay. Even some of the comments we got today, which I think were very good, and I'm glad some of the residents are really looking at it, start to get to that point is how did you come up with that? Now it's a little hard because we didn't distribute all the data we have. As people listening, we have reams of data. It's not some just little map we drew on Google, and it really was sorted street by street, address by address through county databases, tax databases. So we have literally dozens or hundreds of data points on each address. The easiest way to sort that is by address. And that's how we then got to the zone map saying, okay, let's create zones by street addresses, then we can sort them a little better. And that matches up with the city's database on licenses. That's all it was intended to be. It wasn't intended to be, does this neighborhood feel like a neighborhood and this one doesn't? So I want to be very careful about over applying what we do with those areas. So that's one of my comments.
So, and I have a list of, and we can talk kind of generally about it, and then there's kind of a list of questions, and that's two of the questions are, do we want to create new zones? So my personal thoughts are that the analysis map that we generated showed that there are very wide disparities in the neighborhoods that have been created. So the map zones were really trying to group like percentages to one another. And if, for just an example, number 1 and number 5 are both SR1s, but number 1 is 42% short-term rental, area 1, and area 5 is 12.9%. So there's
Area 5 is
Exactly.
SR2.
If you look at, there's no doubt, if you look at, and that's why it was
Well,
done that way. If you look at,
actually, there's a
One and
split.
4. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
There's
if you-
it's
there's a
actually,
split in there.
there is a
if you look at-
row that's SR2, but it's primarily
We're
SR1.
gonna talk zones to people who don't have a map in front of them. If you look at Ocean and Palm and Palmetto, it's no shock. Those are 50 to 60% rental licenses as compared to the back of the island, which ranges between 15 and 20%. So the intent was to show that difference, and we have a difference. Now we want to say, is there how we want to address those differently, or don't we? But by putting one cap and say we have 1,412 licenses on the island, do we want to say, well, 800 or 900 of those are in those 3 zones. The other 500 are out there. We're only going to regulate the 500. We don't care what happens in those zones because they're already 70% rental. There's other ways. So there's ways to look at this that without those 10 zones, it could be that everything on the island except those 3 streets has 500 licenses. Those are the 500 licenses we're going to look at and manage. The other streets are already 60 to 70% residential licenses. Not to sound, this sounds trivial and say it. Does it matter if there's another 2 licenses on Ocean Boulevard or in the condos in Wild Dunes? No, but it does matter if it's on the alphabet streets in Wild Dunes or on Forest Trail. 2 or 3 licenses make a difference. So that's what I'm saying. I want to be careful what we do with this map.
Well, so those are, I think that's an excellent point. They're excellent points. And it gets to when you start drawing lines, and if you were to start by saying let's just say we're only going to establish a cap for area 5, it immediately goes down the rabbit hole of why are you protecting 5 and not 4? You're picking winners and losers. So
Exactly right.
the reason it was created the way it was in this draft is island area 5 is distinctive from area 4. And both caps increase 20% of their current. So they're being treated similarly, but it doesn't allow a huge migration between districts the way it's done here. So if you just set an island-wide cap, you take all of them and say we're going to allow 20% more, that would allow migration, which is what I think we've seen that the rentals are moving to some degree
Not
from
much.
the back from the front to the back a little bit.
We've actually seen an increase in primary residences in many areas too.
Well, and
that's-
I guess we should couch it by saying that I think all of our data is showing that the numbers are actually going down.
The actual number of licenses are going
Yeah.
down over the years. So that's what I'm
Right.
saying. What are we trying to accomplish? The licenses have gone down since in the last 8 years, they've gone down almost 100.
So that
Now, we
was,
may not like where they are or the fact that the occupancy has gone up and we have no data on occupancy. Whether someone rents 12 weeks or 28 weeks, we don't know that.
Right.
so one of the things that, yeah, you kind of hit on this, is that digging through a lot of this is there is, trying to look back through the years, there is a migration. And I think that is part of the problem that we're trying to deal with is, and they're migrating from Front Beach to back further in the island. So if we just had an island-wide cap, we're not going to prevent that. We're going to continue to see that, which means we're not fixing the issue that is being perceived or of the rentals moving into areas where they historically haven't been. So,
But even if you look at, again, we keep going back to Kiwa, because I think they did an excellent job, by the way. They didn't issue an island cap. They said, we're putting a cap on the residential area. These areas are already beyond that. So if we said there's 500 licenses that aren't on Ocean Palm, Palmetto, we're gonna put a cap on those. And that would stop the migration also. They're not gonna
Right.
migrate from Ocean Palm, Palmetto back, because you're now managing the ones that are off of those streets. So there's other ways to get it. I agree, island-wide may not be the way, but it may be island-wide, excluding a certain area. Is what I'm thinking.
and that, well, and then my thoughts again on, if we're looking at Ocean and Palm, those are SR1, SR2 residential areas. So the people that do live there are going to come back and say, why are you not? So that's the argument against it
Absolutely.
again.
Yeah, that's the logic in the current number plus some amount. I've chosen 20%, that we would be giving, basically, in my mind, the same level of protection to the residents on Ocean and Palm and Palmetto that you are to the other areas.
Now, the other two areas, since we're on this discussion where we had kind of you had the no cap, the business areas. I started kind of wondering about those too, is how do we protect the businesses that are in those areas? Primarily, it's number 2, I guess.
2 and 7.
Front Beach. Yeah, how do we protect those businesses so that they don't get taken out and replaced with?
So the existing
Rentals.
code already prohibits that. So you can't,
Zoning.
the zoning took out, because it was happening, condo buildings were getting built. Planning Commission at the time said, if you let this go unchecked, Windjammer, any restaurant is going to be gone and replaced with a condo building. So the zoning code wouldn't allow the construction of new condos or multifamily units.
So
With the exception of SR3, that one little block, you can put a single family house in that, but the rest of them you couldn't build.
In zoning, in the Wild Dune zoning, I know it's slightly different, but zoning is already covered there because they have a planned community. And so changes there even though they're not SR1, it wouldn't be easy to change anything there either. The people off of the beach are SR1 type zoning. So again, if you applied this to SR1, it covers everybody else. SR1, 2, 3.
So you could apply it to SR1, 2, or 3. What it wouldn't achieve is slowing the migration from forward to back, but that's.
But if you said in SR1, 2, and 3 off of those, I agree, island-wide, but if you again use the Kiwa model, they said SR1, 2, 3 excluding these streets. So
Right.
the same thing. So if you said SR1, 2, and 3 for us is about 500 licenses. You would then, any that want to migrate off of the front would have to go into that pool looking for 500. So that you are capping it by putting a cap on the other 500.
But they could migrate from the Front Beach to the Forest Trail neighborhood, which I think is
as long as there were
one of-
licenses available.
right. So that would be the weakness in that model, which I think we've heard.
Well, what you're saying is you would cap everything and you would exclude from the cap Ocean and Palm. Is that what
Okay.
you're saying?
Okay, yes.
so that we were not regulating those areas. But we limit the licenses outside of those areas to the number that they won't migrate because there will be no license available for them.
Or
To add.
there'll be a managed number of licenses available.
Right.
Right now, there's 510 licenses out there. So if you use your model and say, okay, we're gonna add 20%, there'll be 560 licenses. And once those are filled up, they wouldn't be able to migrate off of Ocean either.
Why wouldn't you treat Ocean and Palm just like,
Well, rather than.
because I mean, right now that's 1 and 2.
Okay, I'm just talking here. Again, if you go back to the Kiwa model, they basically left everything outside of their zone uncapped. They applied the license on these streets, okay, and anything that wasn't on those streets wasn't part of the cap. Okay,
I think their cap is everything except for the condos. SR1 and
Same
SR2.
concept, Same
Yeah.
concept, but they did it by street. Okay, so it's the same thing here. If you could say, okay, we're gonna take island-wide 1,400 licenses, 500 of them are back here, and 900 of them on Palm and Ocean and Palmetto. If you want to create 2 districts, that's fine, but not 10. Or if you want to say we want to control the ones in the 500, and if the 900 goes to 1,000, is that what we're here to regulate? Because those areas are already 60 or 70% licenses in some cases. I'm just throwing this out. I'm not fighting this to death. I'm looking for discussion.
So my thoughts are similar. However, I look at area 3 on the map, area 5, and area 9, and believe that a cap is very much in order to somewhat to your argument, Douglas, or your
Mhm.
comment. It's not an argument. I correct you. Discussion. That we cap those. The historic, the history behind 1, 2, 4, some of 6. I think we need to cut some of 6 off down 41st, 42nd, Wildwood, and put it in with 9.
Continue that road,
Or-
continue that line
or
down Palm.
5, where it comes from Cameron across to Palm. Yes.
So 6, the line is down Palm, and you're saying just continue it
Yeah.
to Palm until it hits 41st?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying, Sandy?
and things north of Palm in that district would be.
Go into,
Yeah, I mean,
9 or 5.
historically, that's been a
Relates
transition in
more
and out.
to 5 than 9.
And 8, I don't know why we have a cap on 8. That's all
condos.
multifamily,
By
isn't it?
definition, it's all Palmetto addresses, which is all condos.
Yeah, so that, you don't want to
Yeah.
restrict those.
No?
No,
I don't believe we want to cap those. And again, our market is unique. To Kiowa, to Foley, to anywhere else in the country, Mount Pleasant. So comparing I think you have to be very careful. I think that our market conditions are governing some of what a lot of people fear with our price increases, the rent increases. There's things going on out there that it's not the investment it used to be 15 years ago and 20 years ago when people were flooding into the market and buying up homes and even tearing them down and building what was euphemistically, whatever that word is, lovingly described as the McMansions.
Mhm.
That's not happening now. We've managed that with zoning. We have limits with occupancy and parking on new licensor that I think really take care of a lot of what folks perceive as a problem. And I get that area 3, 5, and 9 predominantly are the residential, and I'm game for caps in that area, similar to what you've suggested. Again, adding some of area 6 here down 41st, Wildwood, and 42nd. Basically drawing that line on that Palm
Just-
That's the Palm.
and across the street from it, or it's just
Yeah,
Palm
that's Palm.
side.
or you could take the first row on the Palm side, because there are some. a big white house on the corner of 41st and Palms. That's a rental.
Well, I said, I think, yeah, that,
Well, and in conjunction with what I'm talking about, I think it's important that the license convey with the house. And they aren't.
You don't go to the back, if you buy a rental, you don't go to the back of the line, you bought a
transfer
rental.
I mean, again,
And
Does everybody,
because there are some homes that.
everybody agree with that?
Yes.
Steve's
I,
wincing a bit.
well, the only reason the only argument against that was pointed out very clearly by one of the comments we got today. If I've been a resident in town for 25 years, I've never rented my house. And now I want to rent it, next year because I'm moving somewhere else. I have a death in the family, I need money. Now I go to the back of the line. And the answer is yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
So I'm just presenting the counter argument to that, saying, that's the problem with that is someone who's not a resident, who's living out of state, who has bought it purely as investment, they keep their license, but I've lived here for 25 years. I need a license now. I'm at the back of the line.
For a short term, you can still rent long term.
But I want to come.
Sorry.
I'm
Throw
just,
that one out there.
I'm just
My
throwing out
family
issues.
is.
Yeah,
That's my argument. to that.
yeah.
So, and that won't be a problem immediately. It'll be probably a longer term, 5, 7, 10-year issue as things change, and we know they change.
But from a design standpoint, because I must say in my past, I designed some beach rental homes. And you design them in a specific manner to meet the need of that program, which is not how you design a home for, family or permanent living. And I think the only thing worse than an abandoned golf course is going to be an abandoned rental house, because there's one next door to me. It's a very bad design. As guy bought it because it was a fire sale and it's appreciated, but he can't rent it. Doesn't rent it much. So, it's virtually an eyesore, just like an overgrown golf course would be if they go belly up. And so you have to be careful. I think of some of these homes that were designed for a specific purpose. Now, that's not to say somebody couldn't renovate a home and turn it from a rental into a more permanent home. I've done some of those these past couple of years. I
But
think
again,
the license probably ought to convey with the property if the property was configured, well, because some properties are configured for that purpose. We could debate whether there's virtue in designing your home for business, but
Well,
again, the 1,500 or more people on the island that are permanent residents who don't currently have a license go to the back of the line.
well, I don't know that that's
Potentially.
necessarily the
Yeah,
case.
I'm just stating
Yeah.
a fact.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
I think the 20% buffer is gracious to cover some of those.
I think if we're gonna do a 20% buffer, we're wasting our time.
We are.
Yes.
Also, what about occupancy too? Can you go there? Because
Well,
that's the
that's-
one data point we don't have is
We don't-
We don't
occupancy.
have.
No.
So you can kind of control some of that migration by getting some of the occupancy information. I think you guys said it somewhere in here, it was like a limit of 12. I believe that was it.
Well, the
What,
number of
12
people, the
weeks
number
of
of
rental?
people, so the number of people is one
12
issue, but
people.
it's,
12 people.
but
It's
how many
already
weeks?
That's
limited.
occupant load. but-
That's what it is.
So, but, I mean, for the regulation, I'm not sure what is right, but with that 20% buffer, we're kind
Well,
of,
so look at we're talking about, I guess I kind of focus on area 5. That area currently is 13% rentals. It's 139 rentals in that area. 20% of that would be 28. So in all of that area, you could have 28 more
Mhm.
rentals. I mean, are you
So
saying that would,
Total area of 1,075 potentials.
are you saying that 28 would devastate that whole area? Is that what you're saying by,
no, I'm
it's
just
I don't
saying,
know,
useless?
devastating, but I mean, it's, the whole reason we got to this is, I thought was goes back to the livability issues and being impacted by rental houses. And if we're going to continue to let the problem grow another 20% before we cap it, which it may not, again, we've seen the rentals fairly steady. So why even do the cap if we're going to set it up? I mean, it kind of goes back to
Well,
capping it either like where it is or closer to where it is. Yeah, if those 20 houses are all in 2-block area.
What about 10%?
going once.
Yeah,
So
no,
I-
David's got a, I mean, what issue are we trying to fight? I mean, it's the number of licenses hasn't changed significantly. It's actually gone down in 8 years. So why would we put 20% more on top of it?
To me,
Cap it
we're
where it's at.
putting 20% on top of a very low year. So I guess in my mind, that's getting us to,
It's been up and down.
that it's getting us to a more normalized year. If you, and I also think, to me, if you were to cap it exactly where it is, I think it creates a lot more challenges in terms of getting it implemented, getting it administered. I mean, there's going to be this, especially when when you think we're talking about 139 licenses. I mean, we may get that number tomorrow. If there's
A run.
a run. So I don't think that, to me, 28 more properties in there. I guess I'm thinking it's very much a long range, kind of goalpost, or not a goal, but it is a long range protection. You hear about the third. Is that going to be kind of put up on its head if the economy goes down, housing prices goes down? Is there immediately this kind of flip in the market? I think we're protecting it against that. To me, a cushion of some amount to just get our handle, get our hands around the thing, watch it. And we have points to discuss, but I would say if you wanted to go lower than that, that be kind of a phase 2 or a second year after we look at it, see how it works. But I would hate for our first year to try to put it right at 128. I mean,
and that came another kind of digging through, and that was one of the things between the numbers Steve sent out and or Scott sent out, and when I was going through it, there were discrepancies in the way we came up with those numbers. So that number is counting licenses that transferred from one property to another, where they're
double counted.
are double counted. Properties with duplexes are double counted because there's 2 licenses on that property. So there is some excess in that depending on how you count it.
Well, yeah. So the duplex should be counted twice.
But it's one property.
But it should still be counted twice. It's 2 licenses, it's 2 rental units, which we regulate rental units. But the one that has gotten 2 different licenses, that is one that would have come off. So that should not have been double counted.
But that was that's another example of thinking through like a duplex. A duplex loses, I guess I would lose both their licenses, and then you would have 2 separate properties added back into the pool.
Yeah, 2 would go out, 2 would go back in.
Don't know what that means, just the thought.
And I wonder what the metric does if we were to exclude. I think, as Sandy had said, exclude 1, 3, 4, that part of 6, 7, 8. I would even dare say 9. We've never really heard complaints from residents within Wild Dunes of their rental neighbors. I think they've got their own security people and don't seem to have a problem. So if we're talking about, not holding licenses or caps on 1, 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, or 9, then you're really dealing with 3 and 5.
I think Sandy included 9.
Yeah, I think
He did, but
I did.
Yeah.
Nine's the same.
But, I've never, in all my time, never heard anybody complaining from any of those back bay drives of those darn renters. And of course, I don't live there, but
I do.
I know.
Nine needs to be,
Nine
nine's
needs
the
to be
same as 3 and
included?
5.
All right, I'll buy it.
Trust me,
Never
15
mind.
years ago, you wouldn't have had complaints on sand crab or sandpiper, but you do now.
Yeah.
So no, so it's,
Yeah, and
I
then you
think
did
it's the
mention,
same.
yeah, the ABCs
Right,
and,
and the ABC streets,
Right.
they're the same feel as the other ones.
Well, there is a residential transition, I think, taking place in the Sandpiper, Swin Oaks, Sand Crab, Marsh Island. I mean, there's,
So I think 9 does get grouped
Okay.
in with 3 and 5.
yeah,
Is there, so I think I've heard Steve, Sandy and Ron kind of, and if I can summarize, regulate with a cap 3, 5, 9, and incorporate a portion of 6 into 9. That's,
Either into 9 or 5, it goes one way or the other. The only reason 9 was drawn the way it was, because that's kind of inside the gate. So if you're going to take part of 6, you're probably better off putting it into 5 than into 9.
I'd like to hear from David, Marty and Suzanne on, how do you guys feel about?
I was thinking, if we're talking about how to implement it, maybe that is the starting point, that we just look at 3, 5, 9 initially. And then reevaluate the other ones that are, depending on how that gets
How it
implemented,
goes.
how it goes.
I think the
Marty or Suzanne?
reevaluation will be a key.
Say that
Sorry.
again?
I think the reevaluation will be a key. Like if you do go ahead and you start with 3, 5, and 9, you really kind of have to stay on it and set a time limit for reevaluation of where it's going.
Marty, how do you feel about 3, 5, 9 regulated?
I think it's a fair approach. I mean, I think it's a compromise of the sort of conflicting interests that we have from, the reason we got started on this, the livability complaints versus the barrage of emails that we all saw today. I think it's somewhere in the middle. So
Right.
if Sandy's okay with it, I'm okay with it.
wow.
So, so I think I'm hearing consensus on 3, 5 and a modified 9. How about the 20% buffer in those 3? David, you're a hard no?
I'm kind of hard against it. I was actually wondering how you got the 198 number for 3, and I'm not sure there's even that many houses.
It's 401 houses in 3.
I don't think that number was right, but I think it might have been 98.
So
20%.
3
Gotta think of it.
should be 93, so it should be
Yeah.
20% over 83, right?
Yeah, you've got
3.
93. Darn,
I've got 198.
I was
Should be
hoping nobody
98.
Catch that.
You were, sorry. I was going by, I was like, kind of
Okay.
superimposed my numbers,
83.
which was 70, and I was like, okay, that's like way off.
83.
Yes, he is correct. He's in 1. No, he's in, Scott's in 3. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Should be 100. I don't know what 190, so 3 should be 100.
To me, this
So
just makes
20%, let's stay on that. David, you're opposed to it? You feel like it's,
I feel like, we won't see any effects for several years. So it's basically doing nothing.
so again,
It lets Matt Sims get his feet under him for a little while before the proverbial stuff hits the fan.
but your point, David, and I've kind of philosophically thought about this, that we are actually modeling Kiowa, and Kiowa has never come near their cap. So has our model that we're holding up ever actually done anything? And I guess that's your point. I think
That's
it's a
my
good,
point.
that's a good
And
point.
again, if we're going to revisit it, and we can revisit it anytime, so if there's a huge demand, I guess we would revisit at that point and say, okay, let's raise the cap.
We will have at least gotten kind of,
A feel for
Over
what
the-
cap is.
we would
gonna
have gotten
do.
over the hump, had something implemented. It would have been there as a safeguard. We can annually revisit it. And part of this will be, Matt's gonna be thrilled to hear this, but you know, some kind of outward facing indicator as to where we are. And that's what Kiowa's not breaking it up for every district, but there's, you know, every month they update the number. The magic number is this. We currently are here. There are still, you know, the delta left. They've never hit that cap, but I guess again, it's a preventive measure. It's in place. You know, if the third is sacred, this kind of is at least keeping that. It would allow
Yeah.
some numbers to change. All right, I know where David sits on the cap. Stephen? You have a,
I reluctantly say, yeah, I'm at 20. So I think we have to start somewhere, but I go back to what I've said the last 3 meetings. We have to get much better at managing data and capturing data and looking at number of weeks rented per house. You know, to me, that's the more important data. So I think, yes, on the 20%, but how many weeks a house is rented is as important as any of the stuff we're talking about here, and we don't capture that at all right now. So a year from now, if we can capture that and say, okay, this is what's happened in those areas, and the occupancy and rental rates have either gone up or down, that's an important piece of data. So yes, on the 20% for now.
okay. It's a different discussion for a different day. I just don't know how you would use that information to establish meaningful regulations.
If you're sitting on a street and the house next to you has a short-term rental license, and historically, I've lived there for 25 years and it was rented 10 or 11 weeks a year, which is a lot.
Yeah,
I can
now
put
it's-
up with that. Now it's rented for 32 weeks a year. That's a significant difference. We don't capture that data.
It is a difference and we don't capture, but what if we did? How would you craft
It would.
a
it would just tell us-
limitation?
It would tell us what's happening in those areas from a utilization point of view. How many turnovers do we have? How much does that affect the neighborhood?
But could we regulate the number of turnovers or regulate?
We can talk about that next year.
We could regulate the caps.
Right, we can regulate the caps, we can regulate other things. We can talk
Decrease.
about when we have the data. We don't have the data now.
Yeah, I just can't, again, maybe it would rear its head as to what meaningful regulation we could come up with if we saw that a house was,
You want to get me started on that today, that's another discussion.
I'd be glad.
I'd love to see that map, Steve.
It's not a map, but you know, if, like I said, there's a difference. If a house is rented more than
There-
26
yeah,
years, is it a
I
residence or is
agree
it a
that-
business?
There's a definite difference. I just
It's
can't
a big difference.
see how we get to it.
Okay.
And even if you do get to it, to your point, what can you do?
That, to me, we're going down a whole different path here. To me,
No,
that's
I
a
know.
zoning
I'm
issue. If you
just-
look
I'm
at,
thinking.
if you look at a neighborhood that's zoned as a single family residence, it says right in the zoning ordinances that you're not supposed to do things to deter from the value of that as a community. If a house is rented 32 weeks a year as a short-term rental, is that a business or is that a residence or is that a family-oriented family community? So it's a zoning issue.
Mhm.
It would be worthy of a discussion once we see the data if it's a problem. I don't know that now.
Yeah.
But these are businesses that are still in the business of residing in a home. Just some people reside more loudly than others, and we've already gotten also ordinance
That's
about that.
home occupation is different than is it a residence or is it detracting from the neighborhood to feel as a residence?
Right.
That's what the zoning calls for.
But you have to envision the widget that gets to what you're getting at. And I don't know of a community that has a widget. I mean, I just don't know how you do it. I've never seen
That's
a
why-
widget that
that's why
gets
it's
to
not
it.
a conversation
Yeah.
today. We're agreeing
get-
to set a cap of 20%. Let's go to the next step.
Yeah.
We'll revisit this when we have more data.
All right. Marty, 20%.
I think all of that's valid, and I think it will come to that, so. I get it. I think, reconciling what you put on here with what David's saying, I'd shoot the gap again and say, let's go with 10%. I mean, so I just did the math on that, on zone or area 5, which is where I live. And I think that's where a lot of the livability complaints originated, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you look at the 20%, it comes out to, I think, 18 new licenses. And so you look at how many streets, I mean, this is just a gross estimate, but those finger side streets, there's probably about 20, or 20 blocks at least. I mean, I know it gets windy around Forest Trail, or let's just say 20 equivalent. You're looking at a new license, one on every street. is that enough to disrupt and cause more livability issues in that zone? And I think, yes, more than likely, especially if there's a high utilization. So, more than just shooting the gap, I think there's an empirical way to get there and say, maybe every other street, if there were a new one, it would cause less turmoil, but so there you go, 10%. For zone 5.
So 5 is 139, right? Is that your math? Area 5 is 139. So 20% of that would be 28, right? 10% would be 14.
Even more to the point.
Be adjusted
Sandy,
for those people.
20%, 10%.
I have lived in these zones, live in one now, and I'd be happy with 10%. I don't have a problem with it. It is not where the investor is buying the property for commercial use. And in fact, there aren't a lot of investors buying for commercial use. Our price points, again, the market's taking care of it. Our price points don't make sense for return on investment with a lot of these properties, other than some of the condos, and even those are ridiculous. So my vote, 10%.
Okay. Ron,
Because we're going.
20, 10,
We're talking about
1, 3, 5, and truncated 9, I think.
Right.
not one.
No.
I'm sorry,
Sorry,
3,
3,
5,
3,
And-
5, and 9.
expanded
but
9.
The adjustment
And part
to
of
6.
yeah, 3, 5, 9, and part of 6.
Can I approach the bench, Your Honor?
Yeah.
So,
Just extend that line straight
yeah,
across. right? That's enough. Yep.
that's what I'm thinking.
Well, I would probably go one parcel north of Palm Boulevard in number 6. So I'm just trying to think where that line, if it bisects Palm Boulevard.
Well,
just
Ron, it'll
because
just be, that one rental will be in a area that,
It's always. gonna be
9
around,
always has,
This isn't,
It's just one of the
9
ones
has
in that area.
218, and it's gonna be allowed.
It's both sides.
So I wouldn't say we
Yeah.
start gerrymandering.
That's fine.
fair
And,
number.
I would be fine with 20 just to be safe, but if, again, that is where the problems or the complaints have come from. And, it is, I've told clients, potential clients in the past that I wouldn't be purchasing on the waterway end of one of the avenues for a rental house, but people still do it. But they don't do it a lot. So, I think maybe 10% is better, and it might force the investor to buy better real estate.
So 10, you're good
No.
with 10. You're good with
I'll
10.
be happy.
Suzanne,
I can
I am.
live
If
with
we're
10?
selecting areas, yes.
Yeah.
We're personally not the areas,
go.
10.
I know David's maybe even reluctant to
I'm
10, but
reluctant, but I could go with. that's
you
better
got,
than
Stephen,
20.
you're good with 10.
Thanks, Mike.
All right.
7.5.
I was
Next
gonna
year.
go at 15.
No, the 10 is good.
10 is more than gracious.
So this question,
Just to
Go ahead.
clarify, as you put that together, because
Yep.
some of the comments that came in today from public comments. I think it's important as you do the zoning, that the map should be secondary. They're based on addresses, just like the Kiva one. It's one of the comments today was like, I can't figure out the map, and the map goes through different. This is
Yeah.
just a pictorial.
Right.
There's a data table that shows every street and every address. This is really what should be used to define the zone. It's
Right.
not the map.
yeah, okay.
So you may want to change how you define it in the ordinance.
And to Steve's point, those that might be watching or will review this wasn't just thunked up.
Oh, no.
There's been a lot of discussions over
Yeah.
several months trying to analyze, to gather the data, and then to do some significant analysis of it that has resulted in where we are now.
Yeah, I think
Discussions we're having.
internally, we've talked about, just the need to package it in a way that answers the questions of the public, that that relays the amount of work that's gone into it in terms of the analysis of the data, the effort that's gone through to get to this point. So we will kind of joining this effort with the planning commission and the actual recommendation, we're going to work on just kind of how it gets rolled out to the community and I mean, kind of immediately from you all to the council, because a lot of this is going to be hitting them cold. So there'll be a need to kind of explain it and get there in terms of how you all arrived at these thoughts.
Are we gonna have another look or discussion of this before you go to council, or is this? all
Yes.
shot?
So,
I'm not sure we resolved.
so let's- yeah, let's keep. So if we want to, a few more nuts and bolts I wanted to go through that, but we can have the conversation now. The thought was that you will, I'll take what you're giving me tonight, modify it, work on kind of the presentation type documentation that would go as a recommendation, kind of an executive summary, and then your action items summary, and then the supporting documentation to kind of explain and walk the public and the council through how you got here. But also the thought was to have a joint meeting with you and the city council to really walk through it and talk about it and have a discussion as to how you got to where you got. So there'll be kind of a handoff because obviously yours is a recommendation. They're going to have to go through the actual ordinance process and public hearings. And so we want to be sure that we give kind of the data dump and all of the information that we have to them and answer any questions that they have. So we'll go back to the nuts and bolts, but that's kind of the thought as to how we're going to next steps after you will have gotten to a recommendation.
So timing wise, because I'm traveling a little bit.
Thinking of doing that after your June meeting, between your June meeting and their June meeting is kind of
Okay.
middle of June, is what we're talking about.
But I'm gonna keep fishing.
When are you? Well, we'll talk nuts and bolts, but I do want to we may want to have a special meeting to just kind of get this solidified. So we'll talk about that, talk about schedules.
So did we agree that the license carries?
We're going back to that. And this might end up being kind of a show of hands. I think this question of transferring, and there's two different, just to kind of start from scratch, there are two different ways of doing it. You could transfer the license with the property. So to think through the negative aspect of that, you've reached the cap. You have a resident who's on a waiting list. He's been on the waiting list for a while. He wants to rent his house. Somebody buys a house, kind of shows up on a Thursday, buys a rental house, and they're able to rent that house immediately. And the person who's been on the waiting list can't rent their house. So that's the problem with the transferability or with transferring with the property. The flip side of that, the other side of the coin is you have this property that's always been a short-term rental for 40 years. He goes to sell it. And because there's already a waiting list, that future owner goes to the end of the line and may or may not be able to rent it. The issue's also been brought up, and I think we could work around some way, but that there's a state law that would require that new owner to be able to satisfy, I think it's up to 90 days of
90 days.
So those are the two models currently, and the Kiowa model is that it does not transfer. But that was probably, if I was to kind of categorize the feedback, that was kind of the quickest and maybe the loudest from the real estate community, that they felt like that was a bad way to go. So
We're saying this would apply to the area that we're putting the cap on, which is 3, 5, and 9, not to
Correct.
the other. So if you had a beachfront condo and you transferred it, the license would transfer.
that's
Just in 3, 5, and 9, that if we decide it doesn't transfer, it doesn't.
correct. So now, yeah, that's right. Since we're talking about altering the program, this would have kind of slightly different effect where it
Ocean
only apply,
Palm and the beachfront condos, the license would transfer.
right?
Would there be a way to offer a special exception? Letting them have provisional rental license.
Well, I think you'd have to give them at least
The
90
person
days under the
transferring
law to
over
work
and,
out.
you know, that satisfies the immediate need. What if, you know, it was going to affect a seller as well as a buyer? Mount Pleasant has limits on accessory dwelling unit permits. They're 10 per every 6 months. And right now they're already through July of 2023. I had a client who was advised that maybe he should apply for a zoning variance, not for anything other than borrowing from a future allocated permit. Unfortunately, the Board of Zoning Appeals is not the proper vehicle to do that, because that variance had to be related directly to the property, and this was not really directly related to the property. The ADU would conform to the property. It was just that there were no permits. But it's a similar kind of idea. I mean, these people had medical hardships and all the 9 yards to qualify for a variance request, but it was just not the right vehicle to do that. And so if you've got real estate transactions involved and you're at your cap with rentals, if you give them a provisional license to let them continue on until the next recycling period, perhaps, or until somebody drops out, you know, they're the first back on. You know, it's kind of like,
Well, if you let them go till they are the first back on, you may as well transfer the license. Same thing as just transferring. You know, my personal opinion on this one, if I very much kind of just thought that was a non-issue. I didn't really give it a tremendous amount of thought, knowing that it was kind of the immediate backlash on it. I would say it's a minor enough issue in the ordering of the waiting line that if it makes it easier for the community to accept it, I would say that we, you know, transfer it. And unfortunately, the resident who has never rented his house but wants to and gets put on a waiting list will be on a waiting list. That's the downside. But I understand the pushback, and I would say if that helps it get over the humps, then I would be supportive of that.
Well, if our licensure ran from January 1 to January 1, it probably wouldn't be quite the same issue, but being that it's in the peak of the
yeah,
season
that's a good point.
and you lose your license, when is it? June 30th? Runs out June 30th.
Yes, that's right.
So you got July, August, September rentals. Most of us are renting properties
No,
out
May 1st,
May 1.
May
Okay.
1.
So it's May, big month,
Yeah.
June and July. I mean, that's your 90-day window. That's that hurts.
Mhm.
And it's more about the consumer that gets damaged, not so much, well, in the management company, if there is, that has egg on their face for having to cancel those things. In some of those cases, we're booking 18 months out ahead for the summer months.
But the
So-
person who just got a license is going to be looking for renters.
Yeah, you know, my other thought on this is we're talking about somewhat kind of preserving, you know, I guess the thread through here is that we are preserving what has traditionally been a rental. And you have to think that to go the way it's written is to actually get that out of the system and then create a brand new rental back in this, you know, 3, 5, or 9. That's probably going to be a more problematic property from the view of the neighbors who have a brand new rental in their neighborhood than the one that has traditionally been a rental. So I guess from my standpoint, I kind of got there from that standpoint as well.
I agree with you, Douglas, on all points, and I don't think this is really going to be an issue.
So you're okay. So transfer with the property. David, how do you?
I kind of lean towards that for the same reason. If we're trying to stop migration or movement of rentals, we're having them change every time the property sells is probably more, has a bigger effect than letting it just stay where it is.
All right, Stephen? Transfer with the property? You have any heartache with that?
I have heartache with it, but
Enough to die on the hill on it?
no. As I said, reluctantly, I'll
Throw
go
yourself
for
on
it,
the
but I have heartache with it, but reluctantly, yeah. Go for it.
Marty, you've said. Sandy, you're
Yeah, I'm for transferring the
Transferring.
license.
Ron,
Definitely
to
transfer.
property.
Suzanne? You're not gonna die on the hill either on it?
And again,
No.
we can review in a
Right.
year.
No, that's why that's
Well,
why
it's
you
just if it's
have
not
a
working,
review
we'll
process set in there. And see
attempt to
how
fix it.
you can step in and make changes,
You could see all the problems that falling in queue.
right?
So those are the only points I had on the nuts and bolts of the ordinance. There were, as it's written, there were kind of other ideas, and I don't know if, there was this idea of a dynamic license or a dynamic number whereby, so Kiowa, the number changes as the number of houses get built. So you have to think of Kiowa still has large, parts of the island that aren't developed. So as a house gets developed, their cap is always, and I think is it 30%? It's 30 or 20% above the number of developed lots. So as the island gets developed, the number of available license gets developed, it changes with time. Had talked, so Kiowa is 30% of all developed lots. That number is the number for the cap. Would we want it to be a dynamic number? Would it, if we find that numbers are coming down and we've chosen 10%, if the next year it's down, would we come down that same, would we kind of lower as we go into time if the number of actual licenses dropped? So that's kind of one question. And it may be that this is part of the future reevaluation, that one. The other one we talked a little bit about, and Stephen brought it up. Do we look at other limitations? Right now, if you build a new house, you're capped at an occupancy of 12. Because this area is kind of back from the kind of prime rental areas, do we make that number in these areas something different for newly constructed houses? Do we make it 8? I see
Marty,
Marty.
you have an opinion?
Marty likes that one.
I think it's good, yeah. It makes good sense.
So I stop and I look at the number of building permits and the number of those properties that got vacation rental licenses. And if I'm not mistaken, correct me, I believe there were 50 permits, of which 2 got vacation licenses.
Something like that.
I don't see it as an issue. Are you asking that overall area 3, 5, and 9 have lower occupancy period, whether it's a new construction or not, going forward for new licenses?
Not
Or did I
occupancy
just make
period,
something up?
occupants, no, number of occupants.
Number
8
of
people.
occupants, I mean,
8, yes.
correct. I honestly don't have feelings one way or the other. I could fall on that knife either way.
I think it kind of already is covered and self-regulated, because, I was initially saying, okay, well, many of the largest houses being built now are more oceanfront houses. You tend to have 2, 3, 4 bedroom houses back, but that's already covered. If you're already going to be limited by 2 + 2 kind of thing. So you're going to already be at 6 or 8 or 10. Like the house I did a few years ago was 3 bedrooms + 2, so it was already limited at 8 or 9. So I think the regulation we have now to regulate based on bedrooms and or square footage kind of covers the fact that some of those neighborhoods have smaller residences already, is my thought. So I don't know if we need to overarch that with something else. That's my thought.
So the only one the area that pops to mind is the back marsh side where you might get, a really large house.
There's a guy
Could
building a
potentially.
6,000 square foot, 8-bedroom house on my street, and it's by far 3 times bigger than anything else, but he's gonna be limited. at
Yeah, and
12.
I just don't know that there'll be,
Any of
that would
those.
make sense to become a rental. I don't know. I don't know the
And
dynamics of
he's
the
gonna
real.
be capped at 12 anyway, so it's like, so I think it kind of already is built into our regulation.
David, thoughts?
I'm still kind of thinking,
Come back to
Um,
you.
no, I mean, so kind of thought this through before. It's, when we look at our residential, I think the residents, people that live on the island, it's about 2.73 people per home, right? Is our average. And you stick 10, 12 people in the house next to them. That's, I think, gets back to part of the issue of why this all came up. I don't know is 12 too much especially for these areas of the island. I don't think we're seeing a problem right now, but will we in the future? Part of that is, and again, I would assume we would grandfather anybody that has a license to continue, renting to whatever their current occupancy is. We're just hopefully eliminated over the years that pushes down. Kind of goes back to, the whole 2010 date in the sand kind of thing. I'm
Mhm.
not sure was the right approach because our at 10, and I think in our ordinance, we want non-conforming. We want to eliminate non-conformance, even though we allow it. So,
Yeah. Would we do it the same way of saying
Yeah.
on this date, if you are more than 8, you can continue, but
I would say if you're predecessing license, from the year before, whichever number is greater, whatever we come up with, or what was on your license for the previous year. And if that house loses a license and goes off the rental market, when it comes back on, now it's capped to whatever the new rate is. Just my kind of thoughts on it. And yeah, I kind of agree with potentially, a lower number for these areas.
I
Suzanne?
agree with Dave. In that, if you're adding these rental homes and say you add 4 that have 8 people that can be manageable versus 4 with more than 8 and more than those cars, and that becomes a lot more convoluted for those small areas.
Ron?
I've seen-
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry, that's Suzanne,
Well, no,
you've
I've
done-
just seen some large homes go in through there. And the disparity is very great.
I think it goes also to the character of the house. The formula in the past was a 6-bedroom house, even though now we're limited to 12 for the optimum of rental for, a large family or multifamilies. We'd be then perhaps shaping any new, if there were to be a rental in those areas to, a 3 or 4-bedroom house, which there's really nothing wrong with. Still 4 people playing Marco Polo in the yard could be just as noisy as 12 people just sitting around getting drunk. But those are patterns that we have other ways to control with our police force and stuff. So, whether 8's the right number, I'm not sure. Again, I don't think anybody's building 3-bedroom houses right now. It's just, not financially viable. So you do a 4-bedroom house and that brings it back by our ordinance to 10 people. But we could split that hair later. But I certainly had advocated for a lesser occupancy in those back zones.
So Ron's a maybe.
Well, it's just a matter of the number.
Marty's a definite.
8, maybe 10 for sure.
I think, Stephen, you were kind of a maybe.
Yeah, I mean,
I think Sandy was a maybe.
We're all babies.
I think you're all kind of maybes.
Yeah.
It could maybe, if you're all on maybe, should we put it on the 1-year revisit list? Or do I put it in the draft that you're going to look at and you give it thought?
I would do that.
Yes.
I'll put it at 8. Put it at 8 for those areas and then you'll have another pass at it at our next meeting.
This might all,
With-
in effect, reverse zone everything. Instead of us fitting a zoning to houses that are there, if homes are gonna be renovated or rebuilt, they might reconsider how they build if they're limited. We don't have so many of those 7,000 square foot monsters anymore.
Yeah, I don't know how many existing over 8 we have in 3, 5, 9 and part of 6. Well, I guess I know we have one at 41st. All right, so
Next
I'm gonna
time
put
there's a-
new construction, just like the 12, if it's newly built after this ordinance and it's in those areas, it's gonna be 8, and you will give that thought for your next time.
I'm telling you guys, next time there's a bachelorette party across the street from my house, I'll invite you all over and you'll know the difference between 8 and 12.
Yeah. Maybe that's the, that's the end of my list of kind of questions. Anybody? I think that's good progress. Any other comments or thoughts or things to consider?
Would you like me to refresh this for you, which is the list?
And,
zones?
and potentially the map, if you could do that.
Okay, I'll do
So
both
did-
those to incorporate the change in 6.
And-
Yeah, and so I know there's a handful of rentals in what we're taking out of 6. Would we adjust the number? And we're doing 10% in those 3 areas.
That's correct.
Plus 10 is just 3 areas. Because I'll tweak this and get it to you and the map.
So I do think the area 9, so the point was made to me that area 7, if you look at the Wild Dunes,
The hotel area.
the hotel area,
Which really is Racket Club. Is that included in here?
Yes.
it is,
Yes.
Racket Club is not.
It's outside of that line. I wasn't sure.
So 9,
Oh, yeah, no, I meant.
Yes, it
the-
is. Here you go. Like I say, it's hard to look at the map.
Oh, okay,
but That's what's
okay.
included in that 7. Boardwalk and Racket Club Villas, Lagoon Villas.
But there's a little residential
I
street
think
in
we
that
can call
area
that
too,
those.
for some reason.
so the map of 7 does
That's where
not
you
show
can
it
look-
going
that's where
across
you-
Palmetto.
Map, what addresses we included.
Oh, okay.
Because you took them out of the address.
Right. The data is sorted by the address,
Okay.
not by trying to determine what's on the map. So if it's
Okay,
on
so the
these-
map needs a little expansion.
For 7.
There's a limit to how fine you can draw the resolution on the computer is only so fine. This is what determines the sort of these street
Okay.
names and addresses. Okay, that's
So
what
I
this
would
column
defer
is.
to that description, not
Right.
necessarily the.
Well, we will need to have a map
We'll
that's
work on
accurate.
improving the map. The
Yeah.
map is really supposed to be a pictorial of this data. This is the actual data and how it was sorted
Mhm.
based on these street addresses.
And I did look at the gentleman's Google map.
Yeah.
Have to blow it up to be able to draw lines.
But we can do that too. That's what the database, the GIS database we have will do that. I mean, like I say, so this map was never intended to be that.
So Stephen, so knowing that corner lots on,
The street address, and most of them, like I said, when you're on the, for instance, if you go into Wild Dunes, they were all on side streets and all the condos have Palmetto Street addresses. So it's very easy to sort, say, give me the Palmetto Street addresses that covers the condos. Ones that are on these corners will have, with only a handful of exceptions, and we had to go through manually and determine which those were. We got some error printouts. We said, okay, give me all the numbers on pick a street, 9th, okay? And they said, okay, well, here's one that shows up as or Carolina. Well, here's one that shows it's facing Carolina, but it has a 4/9 address. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And we had to go in and manually put that where it was supposed to. So there were
Okay.
the exceptions
So-
got printed out and we put them where they were supposed to
Okay.
be.
according to the map.
Right.
Okay, all right, good.
Does
What's up with that?
7 have Grand Pavilion?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I didn't see it on that.
Yeah, kind of
Yeah,
right. for the-
yeah, thank you. Yeah, and she's.
Yeah, there was a list of about 30 or 40 that were exceptions.
Yeah,
Based
okay.
on they were corner lots or they were a weird street. And we had to manually go in and move them.
All right, I have good, so my kind of marching orders are, we're gonna apply it only to 3, 5, 9, and the portion of 6 that's north of Palm. We're gonna change the cap numbers from 20 down to 10, we're going to change the transfer language to specify that it does transfer with the property. It's not going to be in the ordinance, but there's going to be kind of part of the package that explains each year, this group is going to get the data, see what happened, talk it over, make recommendations, and that there would be an 8-person max for newly constructed houses in those areas, potentially for your discussion next time. I miss anything, or is that, I get it?
Well, where did we end up with E, the license being suspended if you don't?
The $3,000
limits.
That's right.
To me, you kind of have, I mean, I know it's hard, and I could, of course, Kiowa's never met the threshold and had to go back and try to prove that it's actively being marketed and some amount of revenue generated. I would say we leave that in there. If we have a challenge, you know, we'll probably learn from that challenge if we need to tweak that,
It
but
does say May.
So, yeah, when we had the discussion earlier, we're going back and forth. My concern is, what if somebody's house caught on fire? You know, that rental house. So then they couldn't rent it because they have to rebuild it, which, you know, depending on how severe, is like, now are they off the market? That was kind of where I was going with the unfit for occupancy statement, saying that they couldn't rent it, as opposed to, are they ready, you know, listing it too high?
I got you.
So my answer to that was, in my mind, you write yourself a check for $3,001 in rent, put it through your account and move
Keep
on
your
and get your license. Pay
That's
the
the,
taxes on it.
Put an RV in the driveway.
A pod. Can you park a pod now for?
no, cannot. So David, I would think that if a house caught on fire, that it should have been at some point in that year, it would have been available. It's either available at the beginning before the fire or at the end after it's, and you know,
It kind of depends on when.
yeah,
We're there in the slide.
yeah. I think that we could, if a real hardship came up, I just don't know how frequent that would be, but it's clearly not a
Yeah.
perfect, you have to demonstrate that it was available.
Right.
So you could even convince the office that even though I didn't make $3,000, it was available. So in Marty's good example, I think that owner, I think we would renew their license. If it was available, listed for rent, and they're continuously paying, and they say I was unsuccessful. I don't know
I don't know a really easy way to
Yeah.
because the same thing you were saying is someone, because they're only going to be out whatever the tax of the accommodations taxes and stuff for $3,000 to keep the license.
Yeah, I mean, you can game the
So,
system if you
yeah.
want to. And that's,
we'll put that on the 1-year review. How many folks
How
are
many of
gaming the
those that
system?
we have?
Yeah. And do we adjust?
you have some now, don't you?
A few. Yeah, we did. We had a lot. There are still some, and they're saying in my office that there's applications showing up with zero revenue and zero accommodations, account numbers.
I
And
believe one of our city council people has one of those.
yeah, probably do.
They said it on a YouTube video I thought I saw.
Oh, all right. All right. I feel good about that. Any other discussion?
Did you want to change it? You want to delete it? You brought it up.
Well, I'm fine with leaving, the word may leaves discretion. People would use discretion.
Well, and the whole thing is, in the event of an annual revenue below,
right.
then you do
Yeah, that's,
that.
yeah,
so.
yeah. I mean, I concur with we could drive the Mack truck through that loophole. But got more concerned about the guy whose house does burn down and takes a year and a half to build back, which is a whole nother issue of licensability of all sorts of things. But that's when the may would allow the zoning administrator to use discretion in accepting a renewal of the license.
We'll buy Matt lunch and.
Well, that's, well, you can't do that.
Right.
Get things
That's
taken
one
care
thing
of.
that really doesn't work in this community. You can't be bribed. I'm sorry.
What?
I've not had any luck.
I'm kidding, please.
All right, I think I have good direction on that. Unless we have other comments, we move on to the old business.
There was another thought when I went through sorry.
Go ahead.
The Folly Beach thing and some of the comments was like the people the full-time residents that, that rent their house 1 or 2 weeks a year. By this, we're pretty much eliminating that. And that was, again, or just throwing it out there that it
Well,
crossed my mind of,
Those people are getting licensed, or they should be getting licenses.
they should be, but now they maybe eventually, in the future, not be able to get a license to do.
Yeah, that's
That's
a
my
thing.
point, yeah. I don't know as if that concerns anybody or whatever.
Yeah, that happens a lot. That was, when the short-term rental software started crawling, that's generally what it was finding. People that had advertised, and it was what I would kind of call a very low level rental, low intensity. But they were, a lot of them actually said when they were identified by the software, they just stopped offering it for rent because it wasn't worth they weren't actually kind of actively getting it rented, and they decided to not do it, have to get accommodations. There's a process to get it into the program, and so they took it off. But yeah, that's a valid point. Hopefully those people have all been getting licenses as they should have been, and that's accounted for in the number of licenses. That does, not to reopen a settled case, but that was kind of the 20%, did some go unnoticed, did they? Because we will, that's part of our process is this short-term rental software that will identify those that pop on. So we hope that we will be finding any and all that get advertised.
So what happens whenever you catch somebody that's already rented?
We make them get a license. If they have rented, they have to get a license. If they're advertising, never rented, they have the option of not getting a license.
Is there a way to look at the accommodations to see how many are like, real low?
Yeah, we have that. We get that you have to declare your revenue to us. So
Right.
we know those that are really low.
Yeah, it was one, in all this, we don't know how often some of these houses are rented that have a license currently.
How many of them are low intensity
Low
rentals?
intensity, how often, I guess,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, how often they're rented,
I can't
we
get to
gotta
how
count a
often. I can
license.
get to how much the revenue.
yeah.
That's the only way I can get to the kind of intensity of it.
To y'all's concern about occupancy or question about occupancy. We had I didn't attend, but heard back, we had a webinar today from one of our providers at Island Realty. We put I think it's Key Data is the name of the corporation. We put our data in through our software, and they spit out some reports. And then they also are hired by other companies throughout the country. The trend right now is kind of a flat line, meaning that 2020 we had some serious increases where we went down. But after the pandemic sort of let loose and everybody was starting to open back up, 2020 really climbed the ladder and had a peak at the summer season that sort of maintained into 21. That again, a gracious number of residents, reservations, very high occupancy, 10, 20%, depending upon the region. And we do break it down: Ocean, Palm Boulevard, condos outside of Wild Dunes, and then the Wild Dunes condos and the Wild Dunes residents. So we kind of regionalize our reporting for these purposes. And overall, I'm going to say the last 18 months, 20 to 21, we're 20% up in occupancy. Well, they're now predicting that we'll probably go back to the 2019 numbers and in 23, based on what the trend seems to be showing now through 22. And it's probably going to not maintain. Again, the market takes care of itself. I think you went through a process where just cabin fever, everybody finding out, feeling their way, realizing they could work in other places, and now settling in more and not traveling as much. And I don't know if you all noticed, but fuel's up and airlines tickets are about triple. And that's probably not going to slow down in terms of that price increase. And again, it's a market condition that we're watching constantly and trying to project out there 6, 12, 18 months for what to expect. Constantly looking at the budget and the projections on things. So we're looking at kind of a flat line right now, certainly for the next 6 months going forward. There's some variations in it, but it's overall, I think we had a banner year, and I don't think we can continue to count on it year after year. On to the parking garage. I mean, the parking lot.
Anything else? Yeah.
Yep.
So the next item on the agenda is discussion of the Front Beach commercial parking lot. You all will recall, and Sandy, you weren't at the last meeting, but we talked about a task that was given to us through the Real Property Committee of City Council to look at the parking lots at the Front Beach. Basically analyze whether or not alternate uses could or should be considered there. And the immediate question that comes up are how the property can be used by virtue of the deed restrictions that are on it. So I think rightfully the commission thought that the first step would be to have a discussion with the grant provider, the South Carolina PRT. And I had a conversation with them and an email exchange with them, and pleasant exchange. And in summary, the city could not, I think I was hopeful that there would be some amount that we could just pay and say, we'll give you back what you gave us plus some, whatever it is, adjusted for time, and we pay you back. But that's not an option. That basically they would review any request on a case-by-case basis, but that with that program, we would have to show them that we are maintaining, and they had a term, and I'm sure it's in the email about, but basically the same level of recreation utility, either on that site, or we could replace it with a different site. If we were to acquire, a different lot that provided the same utility a few miles down the road, we could substitute the deed restrictions on that parcel. It definitely seemed to indicate that we could get that utility through a structure. I mean, if it's 400 parking spaces and we accounted for 400 spaces in a parking garage and then did something else with the remainder of the site, that would probably be acceptable from that group. But that was kind of that's the summary of what that group had to say, that we would have to account for that utility somewhere in our project. So, this is kind of a loose-ended question, so I don't know if anybody else has had thoughts on it, but that's as far as we got.
In fact, he said we can't purchase it back.
That's correct.
I didn't see that.
Well, if we were to find an alternate site we could actually get the site by trading another site. It's more of kind of a horse trading situation, but the only way we would get it outright, fee simple, is if we had an alternate site that provided the same utility.
So what if we violate the terms? What are they going to do? I mean,
No, I agree.
what if
Well,
we,
I think
because we're the ones that manage it, correct? They're just checking to make sure we're using it per the terms. So
Right.
What if we don't?
Well, I
Are
mean,
they-
there is a deed restriction, so anything that we were to do that was not in accordance with that deed restriction would cloud the title. You couldn't have any borrowing leverage on it. I don't think you could do anything with kind of any partnership or bank or other properties by virtue of there being a deed restriction on them.
There's got to be a way to purchase it.
Well, I
You
think
know,
that's it, is basically buy another lot and substitute it.
I mean, it's pretty clear right from the thing. It's substitution of other recreational properties with at least equal fair value, market value, and a reasonably equivalent useful and location. So if we can find that, we can have that one back. But we
Right.
have to provide a substitute property with equal value.
I get it. I don't like that.
You don't want to hear?
I think there's got to be a way just to buy it outright and
Well-
have to substitute property. I mean, if we don't manage it the way they want it managed, are they going to come down here and manage it themselves? If we don't want to turn it into
Well,
a parking garage?
So
That's from
my,
the man that didn't want a parking garage.
Exactly.
yeah, he is fighting tooth and nail. So Marty, the most creative thing that I could come up with was we already own the recreation center. We could, and I don't foresee us ever, and we own it outright. If we were to want to place a deed restriction on that site, and I think we could argue it's not nearly, it's a different recreation utility, but to me, it's more probably, in terms of measuring recreation utility, it's probably more so than that parking lot, that we can make the case that, hey, we will deed restrict this one if you'll undeed restrict that one. That to me would kind of get us around it, but I don't think it's a,
But we don't have to substitute it for parking positions.
Well, I was just saying, but my only reason I raised my hand on that is with everything that's going on in the island right now and our reputation, for us to say we're gonna take 400 parking spaces and put a deed restriction on a rec center and do something with 400 parking spaces, I think is politically a dangerous thing to be doing. That's what you're really saying is let's substitute something else. Because right now they look at that, the utility for that is public access and parking spaces for people to get to the beach. And if we say we're going to take that and substitute something else for it, I think you're getting on thin ice.
I would be in favor of exploring it. I don't think it hurts to ask the question and, kind of poke the bag a little bit and see what comes out of it. Without a firm commitment, you can't do it if you don't ask. If you ask, you might come up with some other ideas. Oh, well, what if we this? Could we that? Or maybe it's only half of it. I'm kind of throwing
yeah.
stuff at the ceiling, but
I guess my question would be, and I think that my assumption, kind of like, I think what Marty is assuming, that if we found the ultimate goal for that property, and we've identified the holy grail of what we wanted it to be, what would that be, and how would we get there? And I mean, so I guess I would think that if it was such a, if it was kind of warranted the expense or the expenditure, it probably would warrant deed restricting the rec center to some, but I don't know what it would be. I just can't visualize what, other than parking, that seems to be, clamored for down there. What else would we do if we could, if there were no restrictions, if we assume that we can get out from the restrictions, which I think we can, what would we do that would be an improvement to parking and how would we get there?
Now that I sit here and think about it, I don't know that I want parking down there. I live down there. And number one. Number two,
You live, when you
I-
say parking at the rec center?
yeah,
Well, no, I think that, I'm not suggesting we would put parking at the rec center. I think we
but I
would
think
say,
you have to open more up to be able to be a light.
no, I would say that those fields and
Okay.
courts provide as much
Recreation.
recreational utility as the parking lot. I would argue more so that that's more of a recreation. And it's 5 acres instead of 3 acres. So it's,
So what would,
That was my concern is we're going to turn the rec center into partial.
no, not parking.
Like to
I personally think that in its current state, and I'd have to convince them of this, but that in its current state, it provides more recreational utility than that parking lot
I mean, basically, you're preserving the rec center as a rec center. by a
Right.
Deed.
by a
Sure.
deed. Where right now, we could do whatever we wanted with it.
Yeah, so instead of, doing something different with it.
But in their eyes, doesn't this deed restriction protect that as public parking for 400 people to get to the beach? That's a high value to them.
Where do you get that 400? I'm looking through all these.
I think
No, I'm
that's the
just whatever,
number.
however many parking spaces we have, what I'm saying, they bought into this because we were gonna have a parking lot so people could get to the beach.
Beach
That has a
access
value
parking,
to the
I
Parks
think.
and Recreation Commission.
Yeah, it's
different
definitely,
than a-
it's a
different than a rec
different
center.
recreational utility.
Right, that's what's
But you're
different
kind
than
of-
a rec center.
It's different, but I would say it is of equal or higher recreational utility. That's just not a lawyer and don't pretend to be one, but I think
Nowhere
that we
in
could,
any of this that they talk about any kind of quantity of parking, just
Oh, no.
No, they
beach
don't.
access.
Oh, no.
So,
No, there's no point.
you could put anything you want there, you're gonna have to provide parking for it from the zoning ordinance.
I think some of it's a
Yeah,
moot
it's-
point, and I would challenge that you approach it from that point of view that you're talking about with the recreational use and C.
Yeah.
Then it becomes, well, now what do we do with, if we can, this, and I mean, come back to us with, yes, it's a possibility, or no, forget it, let's move on to the next.
what if I say it is a possibility? I want to get to what you guys are going to pitch that it'd be used for.
I thought we had
Okay.
a short list last meeting though. Didn't we? But
Do we have,
We had mentioned some things like that amphitheater, and
Commercial
we didn't mention
space.
parking and commercial.
Event space.
Soccer, yeah, event
Soccer, yeah.
space. Rec space.
How detailed do we need to get?
well, I mean, if it's, so if the idea is like an amphitheater that, are you saying that it is flexible space that comes and goes? Like you park on it?
What level of detail do we need to get to make that substitution or to prove the point, I guess? Do we need, I mean, I know an architect, so.
But can you explain what the idea would be? An amphitheater instead of parking? An amphitheater with a parking garage?
Well, as Ron said, to comply with all existing zoning code, you have to provide some parking for whatever the usage is, so. Some combination thereof, but
But usually those amphitheaters can be pretty portable. Like you can break them up and take them down, especially during high season.
I guess that's what I was thinking you were saying,
Yeah.
kind of in the
Mhm.
slow months, it becomes like Firefly has kind of a field with a stage at one end, is that? But you don't actually, I mean, I think we could do that now without any, because you're in the summer season, it's available as parking. You may have parking stops that you have to remove, but I don't think that would require anything from the PRC.
So, I mean, is there an issue with loss of revenue too from that lot from parking if we take it all away? I mean, what is our,
To me, you have problems if you take it away as parking. I mean,
right,
you have you have problems from a congestion standpoint. You have problems from a revenue standpoint.
did you want to take the parking away? Is that what you were thinking?
yeah, so so taking away parking causes more congestion?
I think so. I think people are clamoring for every space they can get. And if there's a shortage of space, so they're sitting there kind of slow circling, waiting for somebody to free up the space.
I think it'll drive them back in your neighborhood.
Yeah, and then ultimately they go elsewhere. So I have always envisioned the thought to be put as many of the visitors there because they're not in the neighborhoods at that point.
So parking in the summer and, your multi-use off-season for event space. But not in this peak of the summer.
Peak of the summer, continue to have it.
I think May through September, you've got to keep parking there, honestly.
Yeah.
And I'm not really in favor of more retail in a parking garage. I don't think that's I don't think we want to bring, I don't know. I don't want to compete with the businesses already on that Front Beach Strip. Unless you're creating more visitors down there to feed more businesses and the existing ones, I think you're diluting a diminishing entity.
What was the impetus for this again? What was the comment that was brought up by council? We got an
Could it
unsightly-
be, it's unsightly, it's underutilized in the winter. Could it be better utilized? Could it generate even more revenue than it currently does? It's currently not generating revenue for 7 months out of the year.
Round number, what is the annual
That was-
revenue
yeah.
to the city?
That was part of the last
Mhm.
discussion.
I don't know.
That's all?
Fluctuates 100, maybe 1,000,001, and that's including the on-street parking.
Well, I thought our consensus last meeting was that yes, the knee jerk was we thought there would be a better use of that property. So I don't know. I'm sort of wondering if I had
So do we,
had that wrong now.
I mean, I think, if I may, I think that the ask was
Could you stand closer to the microphone? Gotcha.
I think that the ask is wanting to look at that property, let's say, assuming there's no restrictions. How can that piece of property continue to maintain the parking? Because I think when we talked to council about it, they were adamant that reducing parking there would not be ideal. And if you add uses to that lot, you would potentially have to add parking if you're adding, additional activities there. I think that the way that some people are looking at this is an opportunity to maybe consult with urban and land use planners, just think maybe outside the box of what could happen. I don't think we have to solve right now if it's, allowed by the zoning or these deed restrictions. It was really just to think outside the box and kind of cast a wide net out and see what could be possible than what we currently have. Whether it's a multi-use building with commercial offices, we just don't know. It's been talked about before, but I don't think we've ever really explored it more than just conversations like the one you're having. So is this an opportunity to get some input from, again, urban planners, architects, or potential developers who can think outside the box and have seen how other communities have dealt with similar property? Just to see what is possible. So I think that was the ask.
Well, I guess I didn't understand last time then, so apologies if that's on me, but I didn't understand that the intention or stipulation was to maintain the current level of parking. I thought we were looking at it from a different lens and saying, rethink the property altogether. And if it's half the amount of parking, so be it. But I mean, if that's the case, then yeah, I think that changes what are we talking then other than a parking garage? Right?
Well, I think there's a potential for the off-season. What do we do? Where you've got an asset sitting, say 4 months out of the year that could be better utilized. I think that's what I'm hearing. 4 or 5 months out of the year, that thing's just a dust bowl.
So it's
right?
still just a parking lot.
Yes, but are there things that we could come up with that could be there that would be removed and it gets the full intensity back and then
Or it's
it's,
convertible
not.
space or something mobile.
yeah.
Well, then I think, yeah, yes. That's the
Or if there
obvious
were
thing.
some permanent structures along the perimeter that could house, a winter festival. I don't know what that is.
But
the
do we need to
vegetable
talk to a
market that
planner
was
or
at
a
the
designer
rec
to
center,
get to
bring it
that?
there.
What Marty says.
Mhm.
I think we need to ask for if there's any money in the budget to hire somebody to come in and perhaps,
But if we're not building any
What if it-
infrastructure, it's still gonna be a lot, a flat
But
lot.
I don't think you want to limit yourself to you're not building any infrastructure. There might be an infrastructure that maintains or even enhances the amount of parking there while mixing other types of uses. We just don't know. And I think that is what is being asked is just think outside the box or get some people who might come back to you all or the city with ideas. And at that point, then you start evaluating, okay, this is not feasible, kind of like what happened with Stantec when they came over and just brought very high level ideas. And then you start sort of ratcheting it back down from there.
But I think we're
I still
talking
want to
about-
be the first one on the gondola, right?
But I think we're still talking about some sort of parking structure. though. If we take the flat space that's now used for parking, if we put anything else in a portion of its space, we have to build up to accommodate the current level. So no, I think it's important to just say that.
Well, I don't know
We're
that
going
we
to have a
have
parking
to,
space.
we ought to.
Right, maybe
Parking
it's
lot.
nice.
I mean, I think
Because
it's in the city's best interest to maintain parking there.
Yeah.
What level, how much, I don't think anybody would advocate for less because of the use and the demand. So maybe that is the only stipulation that you put in place to a developer or somebody coming up with ideas is, we want to maintain parking because that's important. But then you let everything kind of run wild, if you will, to come up with ideas.
I think, part of that question, I think from last week was, would we change any of our ordinances, which I guess to allow our zoning, to allow other uses that are prohibited now? And I think our conclusion, I thought we kind of said no, that, that wasn't, as long as it fit within our current ordinances. If somebody could come up with somehow to use, I guess we'd be open to it, but it's somewhat what I recall from thoughts last week was we couldn't come up with anything per se, but somebody else might come up with something as long as it kept the parking, met all our current ordinances. It'd probably be worth looking at.
I don't think I'm fully grasping it, but maybe
Yeah.
it's my weak imagination. so
Well-
I'll
That
just say
kind of
sure,
leaves
why
just
not?
convertible space.
Right,
Right.
That's all you come down to.
Sure,
That,
sure.
that's all we can think of anyway, but
So if, I think, and I guess I understand why Marty's struggling. And I think we're probably all in the same place. Nobody is kind of coming forward with, oh, the perfect mix
Yeah.
down there is this, that, or the other. I guess my mind goes to, we certainly could hire people, we could talk to people. I think you kind of know that it would be some, I guess where my mind goes is it would be some mixed use development with, I think it would have to kind of have a parking garage. If we were to go through that process and get to that point, right? I mean, it sounds like we would get there, I guess. There may be some creative idea that nobody here is coming up with it. But is that something, I mean, is that kind of a direction that you all would see being supportive of and thinking, this is an improvement, or would that be an effort that we would be spending money, spinning wheels, that we ultimately get to a place that we don't think we would be embracing anyway? Can you all, I mean, do you have feedback on whether you think you could get to a place of supporting, let's just say kind of the world's greatest mixed use development or the world's greatest kind of recreational facility?
to service a debt, I don't think you can fool around with the parking. I mean, you're talking about $900,000 of gross income. I don't know what the net is after expenses, but you can do an awful lot with something like that moving forward. And I would like to, I guess, expand a little bit on what you're asking. What might be the rules that we're looking for? That the parking, number one, remains similar in number, some up or downs, not a deal killer. But I would think priority number one would be the parking remain similar to the numbers we have now. And number two, that it, recognize the seasonality of the usage there for whatever may come up. Those are the two kind of high priorities in my mind for yes. I think if the right presentation's made, I would be open. Can't speak for everyone else to looking at what might be available out there for the community, rather than just a sand parking lot right now.
Well, if we hire planning consultants, they're going to come up with parking garage mixed use development.
Yes.
So, we can save ourselves some money if that's not what we want right now. But if it is something that we could consider, because they're, while that sounds very packaged, there's probably some very intuitive ways that they could, handle that. The question is then, what do those mixed use things become? To your point, it would be restaurants and, competing, and maybe we could handle one more, maybe we can't. Perhaps more retail, I don't know what the
We
disposition.
need a water slide.
Well,
Ferris
I was
wheel.
thinking an ice rink, because it's winter and we all need to play hockey, don't we?
Yes.
And, so, that's the trick, is finding, and it's not, planners aren't going to find you the occupants for these buildings, and that's what a developer or, potential user, those are the people we need to ask. And then we can maybe go to a planner. If we put the notion out there that, we're thinking of trying to improve this property, who's game, before the city bought the marina, I was looking at plans for what some private people would have done with the marina. And it's all that's well and good, but if you have people, who want to, back then, people did have offices, so there could be some office space, there could be some restaurant space. And by golly, the first thing a developer is going to say is you got to put a retail component there. That's the only thing that's going to work. And we're trying to resist that. That is something we did say last month that we weren't going to allow, was residential component. But unless you're starting to get into a 6-7 story building, or one that's exceeding the 40-foot limit. But who are the users? Do we have some people in the business, restaurateurs would know whether or not this area could handle another restaurant, or another t-shirt shop or souvenir shop or whatever. And and it's, I don't know who those people, and maybe planners do know that and do that kind of work, but I just we got to figure out whether we'd be good with a major construction. I mean, that's tens of millions of dollars.
That's it. I mean, I think it's gonna come down to finance, we're gonna, it's, for what I'm hearing, I don't think we're gonna see the benefit for the capital investment for these ideas.
Yeah.
So, is it an ugly gravel lot? Yeah. Should we just pave it and be done?
Well,
And I'm like Marty, I'm struggling with the vision here, and it seems like it's, all of a sudden say we're gonna get planners and multi-use, look at multi-use options and parking decks and stuff. That's a quantum leap from what I was thinking that we were asked. To me, it's a public space. We own it. It's a parking, it's a sand parking lot. There's some relatively low capital things we can do to improve the parking, the cleaning up, pave it, put some, make it like, so you can have open air markets there, put a few temporary sheds in like they have, in Mount Pleasant. You want to have a market there, put an area where you can construct a stage, and when the parking lot's empty, you can have a concert there. But I mean, those are relatively low cost things that improve the utilization significantly without saying we're going to spend $40 million to build parking decks and retail space that we may or may not need or want.
Right.
So to me, that kind of a plan of saying, how do we clean this up? Maybe put some nice open air sheds in that, you know, that we can do some markets in, or have some those kind of events in, you know, stages, concerts that wouldn't intrude significantly on the parking around the perimeters and the edges, and take that step.
Yeah.
You know, not a major capital project. At least that's where I was starting to go.
He just said it better than.
So is there consensus on Steve's
Yeah, I
point?
think.
Yes.
I mean, look what they did out like out in front of, what is that Moultrie over in Coleman, where they just built
Yeah.
some sheds and they have a farmer's market there. You know, those kind of things, it makes it, and you can do other things. You can have shows there and other things, and art fairs, and just a bunch of sheds that, you know, protect people, and they can set up tables and that kind of stuff, temporary structures.
Yeah, some of that drainable, that fancy grass you can drive out on.
Exactly, that's true.
Yeah.
So to me, that's more what I was envisioning when I heard, can we do something better with what's there, not build parking decks and
Yeah.
restaurants we don't need.
And we do not need to consult anybody for this.
No.
That's what I was
You
thinking.
know, a good landscaping plan. would
Yeah,
Right.
Resolve.
To me, if that's kind of the group's high level thought and consensus, the next step would be to relay that back with I think the plan for us would, if that's, everybody kind of agrees with that concept,
That's scary, don't agree with me.
that
No,
we
I-
would,
I-
that we would engage a
And to keep
landscape
the
architect or a
And-
design firm.
And to keep Ron happy on the one end, in the winter time, we can set up an inflatable dome and put ice skating.
There you go.
I don't play hockey.
But I mean,
Sure
that's
is fun to
more
watch, though.
the kind of flexible temporary space you could do that I was thinking we would be looking at. And there's not, I don't think, a lot of dollars involved.
Did you capture what he said?
I
We got it.
We want
couldn't
it,
say it again, trust me.
David, you-
It's the same.
No, I was in agreement. If we're looking at what could the city do, I think that's really kind of what we're at to. Yeah, I know we talked about, you know, if a developer wanted to come in, I don't see it. But, you know, take 2/3 of it, build a double deck parking garage so they can add
Right.
office spaces along the front, or restaurant or retail. I don't think, I'm not against them doing that. I just don't see where they could actually afford to do it. And I don't think as a city, we
I think
want to do anything like
Is
that.
there even a need for
glorified
that?
landscape and
Yeah.
park plan is kind of what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Capital
Yes.
infrastructure. Yeah, improve the landscape and do some kind of things, maybe some paving, but let's not building structures.
We
Other than
can plant trees with our tree fund.
There we go.
Mhm.
We can relay that back to real property. I mean, that's really
That was
all
good
we
enough.
wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
so landscaping in a park atmosphere,
Right.
and in my mind, I see it on the back of the lot, and down
Right.
the sides,
Exactly.
not in the core
Right.
of
Exactly.
the
Right.
lot.
Stuff
Exactly.
kind of around the
Um,
perimeter, you can maintain the park.
Yeah.
So you focus away from the.
And when we started talking, my mind drifted immediately to one way to enhance that place is to do some landscaping around the perimeter now and kind of give it a little more character than it has. I mean, it's labor intensive and you gotta maintain it, but it would help a lot at this point. So,
I think that's good direction. I mean, there would be a reluctance to kind of engaging investors, designers, developers, if we kind of knew at the end of the day what they were going to pitch, and if we knew that pitch would kind of land dead on arrival, that we'd save them that effort and you all that. So I think that's good direction, and we'll report that back and
I'm
see if there's
some good examples out there. I can't really think of it. Unfortunately, all I can think of is the little farmer's market in Coleman. But I mean, that
Yeah.
feel where you have some structures, but you keep it open. I'm sure there's some other towns that have done these kind of things. I guess I'll do some research. and see- Yeah.
there are a lot of
Let's
them.
do
There are
some
a lot.
searching. That's more, I think, what we're looking for.
yeah.
You know, there are, just examples of ballparks, for instance, you know.
Around the areas of Baltimore.
You know, you don't have to build huge stadiums.
Yeah.
You know, you could do them very simply with manipulating earth,
Yeah.
and have a far more festive feel. Make it festive, get some landscaping to make it more attractive. Might have to use a raised bed because of all the sand, but I think that would do a lot of good. I wouldn't advocate paving it,
No,
but,
probably not.
but maybe putting down some, fresh
Convertible grass.
grass or
Crush and
crushed
run.
stone or something.
Right.
All right, I think that's good. I think that's good.
Just a quick note, way back in the day, when that was owned by a private entity, it was viewed by some developers for lots of different things. The city reacted very quickly and was able to purchase it, so it didn't become a water slide amusement park.
I didn't say water.
Was it the county?
That you did.
That's right.
Was it the county, Sandy? Or
Oh, no.
some other, a private?
Yeah.
Because I know we squabbled when the county did buy the county park. I know that was a squabble.
Can we charge whatever we want for those parking spots?
Council sets that rate.
So I'm just thinking we sink money into a beautification project, we can raise the rates to recoup that cost.
Yeah, I think
There's nothing in
they're,
the deed that would.
I think it's pretty expensive now, but no,
Think
yes,
they-
we could.
They've tried to be competitive with the county park and not push everybody to the
think we-
park, but at the same time.
But if we make it pretty, we're gonna blow them out of the water, they're gonna wanna park over there.
That park still has
County's
a
pretty nice.
bath facility. Well, we have two.
Yeah, so
Could
you have
be,
right across
yeah.
the street.
Yeah,
you have
Trust
bathroom
us,
facility.
that's right.
Then you undercut the park.
All right, you all have been here for over 2
Yeah,
hours,
can we skip the last one?
and I don't have anything,
Transportation.
and that's coming. Eventually it's coming. We're gonna get off stop with that. But I don't have
You
anything on
haven't put all that
transportation.
together yet.
No, I haven't. Next month. It's always next month for transportation.
That's fine.
I'm just gonna go ahead, the next meeting is just gonna be the regular meeting, and then after that, it's gonna be a joint. We're not
Yes.
gonna do anything between now.
That's correct.
Okay.
Plan is, do you have a preference between buttoning up? So the kind of big ticket item on your to-do list is buttoning up the short-term rental stuff. If you all wanted to button it up at a special meeting, we could, or if you want to wait until your regular meeting and then anticipate a special meeting with the city kind of shortly, like maybe the week after that. You have a preference?
I will be gone until June 5th. Starting next week.
Okay,
So the next
So that-
regular meeting is June 8th.
Actually, so I'll be back in time for the next regular meeting.
I'm
Okay.
actually out of town that week.
June
but I-
8th?
Yes, but I can attend via this.
Okay.
Is Zoom
Yeah.
allowed?
Yeah, we can, you can, yeah, we can do that. I think it's, yes. Okay, and then is everybody here? So the week of the 13th to the 17th? That's the week following our regular meeting for potentially a workshop with council on this? Okay. Does anybody have any doubts that we can reach consensus on a recommendation at our next June meeting?
June 8th,
Yeah,
June 8th.
present our changes.
yep,
review,
prevent these
discuss,
changes.
I think.
I think we're good. I
think we're
feel
pretty
like
close
you
to
guys
being
were
there.
close.
Get your
Okay,
transportation plan buttoned up.
yeah,
Yes.
okay, very good. I think we're in good shape.
Great.
So on the,
And a special meeting somewhere between the 13th and the 17th.
Correct.
With. a
With city
workshop with
council
city council,
on your recommendations on short-term rentals.
with the intent being to explain some of what the
Yeah.
reasoning and the data.
Yep, you're handing off, so you will have made your recommendation at your meeting, and then that meeting, you're handing it all to them, explaining it and letting them run with it.
so just sometime in that week, we don't have to shoot for. it.
No. Do you guys want it? You want to go ahead and set one, or does it
Why
help
not?
you?
Let's go with the 15th.
Can we go with the 13th?
Any problems with the 13th?
That's a Monday.
Where?
How do
And
you,
June
how,
13th?
yeah, June 13th, Monday? Does that afternoon, do we have to wait till 4:30? Could we do it? Marty, what's your,
I'm fine.
could 3? Is that too early for you?
On Monday, everything's too early. I'll make it work.
Okay, so let's say 3 PM, Monday, the 13th.
Do you think it's gonna be a short one or a long
I think it should be fairly short, I think.
Just hand it off and I'm not gonna get.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There'll be some Q&A.
No, I think our meeting with council could be
No, we just talked
The
about
13th.
Not the amount of time, he's talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, any idea if that'll work? I think that meeting will be an hour. So we'll need to double check that date, and we'll be back, but hold that in your calendars. All right?
Any other, do we have any other miscellaneous?
I don't have any.
Now we'll take your
We
motion.
did, but it's next meeting.
Next meeting.
You got a second?
So-
Second.
We have a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any dare opposed? Thank you.
What did we have, we talked about earlier on that you were gonna put on the agenda that wasn't on the agenda?
Vice
Oh.
Making you vice chair.
chair.
I probably won't be at that meeting.